Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Kate Krause, and this is the class on selecting studies for systematic reviews. This is one in a series of classes about how to do the systematic review process. Today's class, I think, will be a little bit shorter, hopefully about 45 minutes, to leave you some time to ask questions about the process. If anything comes across your mind that you don't understand or anything you want to bring up, just type in the chat box, and we'll try to get to your question as soon as we can. Just a couple other little things before we get started. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video. This will save bandwidth and help this session go a little bit smoother. We are going to be recording this session also, so just keep that in mind if you don't want to ask questions that other people might see. And the last thing is that we will be using one of our library help guides on systematic reviews. The URL is at the bottom of this first slide, and I have typed it into the chat box. So if you'd like to link to that and follow along, you can do that. Or you can just watch the presentation. Either way, it's up to you. It's all good. So let's get started with how to select studies for systematic reviews. So my name is Kate, and I am one of the librarians at the MD Anderson Research Medical Library. I specialize in doing literature searches and systematic reviews, and systematic reviews are one of my favorite things. Love to work on them, love to teach people about them. They are a challenging and interesting kind of research project to do. My colleague, Soraya Layton, will be helping me by monitoring the chat box and making sure all the technical stuff goes smoothly. Thank you so much, Soraya. She's one of our instruction librarians, and she teaches a lot of classes on the databases like PubMed and EndNote, so she is a great resource. So, selecting studies. It's kind of an overwhelming process. At this point in the systematic review process, hopefully you've been able to watch some or all of the other sessions we've been teaching. By this point, you should have searched all of the databases. You should have gathered all of the possible studies about your research topic and gathered them together. This can be a little bit overwhelming because usually you will come up with at the very least several hundred studies, if not several thousand. And that can seem a little bit overwhelming, but I can give you some tips and tricks that will make the whole process from this point onward go quicker. So we've got a few things that we would like to go over today to teach you. The first thing is the actual process. Who does what? How does it work? Another thing that we're going to go over is the inclusion-exclusion criteria, which you should have set up in your planning the protocol stage. But, you know, these things always need to be more detailed out as we go through the process. So we'll talk about that a little bit and how that helps you do the selection process. The third thing that we're going to talk about is tracking your selection process, keeping track of all those numbers and how you did the process. You'll need to do that and keep really good detail about that because you actually have to report about this and write about this in your actual article. So that's a very important thing to do. And if you go through the whole selection process without tracking it, it's kind of hard to go back and recreate those numbers. So those are our four main goals to talk about today. All right, so we have a handy dandy help guide on our library website. The URL is there, and it talks about a lot of the different steps of the systematic review process. More information than you could ever possibly want, and more information than we could go over in this short amount of time in class today. But let me switch to that. Wrong page. Okay. So at our library website, we have a lot of really helpful help guides that teach you all sorts of things from how to use EndNote to how to search PubMed to how to do systematic reviews. And here is our systematic review help guide. The tab we're going to be using today is the Selecting Studies tab. And it's kind of short and sweet, but there's a lot of really helpful information here. And I'm going to point out a few of the things that you'll really want to use. First off, is the basic process. How do you do selection once you've gathered together your 1,000 studies? Who does what? What is the process? And it's in a nutshell, it's fairly easy. First off, you do need 2 people at least to do the selection process. And believe me, the more people you have, the faster it will go and the easier it will be. But at the very minimum, at least you need 2 reviewers on your team to look over all of those citations. And each person has to look over all of the citations. It's not like you can split them up, though I have seen some people do that. But the main idea is that each person will independently look at all of the 1,000 citations that you guys have found and vote yes or no as to whether or not you should include those studies. There are 2 rounds of voting. So at least 2 people need to look at all the citations twice. The first round of voting, you just look at the titles and abstracts and you say, this looks good, this doesn't look good, this looks good, this doesn't look relevant. You just go through all the titles and abstracts and vote yes or no as to whether or not you want to keep the citations. 2 different people do that, and then you compare your notes. If you have any disagreements, then you come to a consensus by some pre-established, predetermined method of coming to a consensus. Usually people have a 3rd person on their author team to decide whether or not to include a study, or you can just hash it out by discussion. Either of those ways is considered to be acceptable by best practice standards. So you go through all the titles and abstracts, 2 people independently. You have probably at this point narrowed down your group of citations from about 1,000 to 100. So just by looking at the titles and abstracts, you usually kick out about 90% of all the possible studies you might want to include. Then you kind of sort of do the whole same process all over again, this time looking at the full text articles of the remaining citations. So you've got to go and find all of those actual articles. And then once again, at least 2 independent people look at all of the full text articles and go through the same process again of voting, yes, we should include this. Yes, we should include this one and this one and this one, but not this one. That's not relevant. Not this one, wrong patient population or wrong drug, wrong surgical procedure, whatever your criteria are for your inclusion and exclusion. In that way, you usually go from about 1,000 studies to maybe 10. The average number of inclusion is about 1 to 3%. And that's just the way it goes. There's no way that you can search and find only the studies that you're going to include and not have to go through this very tedious process of reviewing so many citations. It's just part of the systematic review process. Do we have any questions about that? I'm going to demonstrate it a little bit better with a little bit of show and tell, so it might be a little bit clearer if it's slightly hazy at this point.
There's no questions in the chat at this moment.
Okay, great. Okay, so the second thing we want to go over is how do we decide which of those citations we have found to use or not? You actually have to make a list of inclusion and exclusion criteria. And I have included a few kind of helpful little ways for you to create that list. It's different for each topic, of course, you know. So it's going to be very dependent on what your research topic is. But here are some helpful tools that will help you create your inclusion-exclusion criteria list. For example, this is going to be right down here in the left-hand box on our help guide. Formatting your research question in a PICO format. I know that sounds really basic, but it really does help you establish your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So I have already got that open. Let's see if I can get that to. Great. So when you have a vague research question, you really need to think about exactly what it is you're looking for. Let's say you're trying to decide whether a drug is very effective at decreasing tumor size, something like that. You have to figure out exactly what are the patient population that you are going to be looking at. What's their age range, sex, ethnicity, types of cancer, all of those types of things. You really have to think about it before you start doing your systematic review. And in this way, when you're looking at your citations, you can quickly say, oh, that study is the wrong age population, or that's the wrong stage or grade of cancer. So thinking about your research question in a PICO format really will help you list those inclusion-exclusion criteria. The P per patient population is very important in helping you do this. The intervention is also extremely important in helping you define your inclusion-exclusion criteria. What is the drug you're looking at, or the surgical process, or whatever it is? How frequently are you looking at that drug being administered? What's the administration route? What's the duration of how long they administered the drug? All of those types of things you should kind of think about before you even start looking at your citations. Comparison is also very important. Do you only want to look at studies that compared your drug to a placebo? Or would you accept any studies that compared your drug to perhaps another drug? Would that help you determine what your specific research question is? So, depending upon your topic, these things are all going to be very important. The outcomes, sometimes we don't really, that's a little bit more difficult to look at when you're looking at just titles and abstracts in the first round of voting. We'll get into that a little bit later, but very important. And the last thing, which most people don't think about, is the type of research question you're asking. Is it, for example, if we're looking at is a drug effective, that would be an intervention question. But you might be looking at a diagnostic question. Is this particular test effective at evaluating whether somebody has cancer or not? Is this drug good at preventing cancer or preventing advancement of it? That type of research question helps you determine what types of studies that you will look for to include in your systematic review. So let's take a look at that. Right now, we're talking about the PICO. So that's sort of the topics that you're looking for. Who are the patients? What are the drugs? What are your comparisons? The type of research question is a little bit different. So let me get that up. This is also on our help guide. So determining which types of studies to include. If, for example, you are doing an intervention or therapy kind of question that's discussing a drug and whether it's effective at doing whatever, then the types of studies that you're going to want to include are, of course, RCTs. Most people want to include randomized control trials, but they don't realize that it's also a really good idea to include a few other types of studies like cohort studies and case control studies. These are more long-term studies that will help determine whether or not your drug in question has adverse side effects and a couple of other things. So it's good to keep that in mind because you don't want to make a systematic review that promotes a drug that says it's really effective at doing XYZ without taking into account whether or not it has adverse events and bad side effects. So depending on what type of question you're asking, intervention question or prevention question or diagnostic question, you can see that each of these different types of questions has different types of studies that are good to include in your systematic review. And this is just a short summary of what those types of studies are. You can see it goes on for quite a lot. The main type of study that I work with people on is intervention questions, but we do also do a lot of quality of life studies, and those include very different types of studies. So this is a good little short overview. You might decide you want to use slightly different studies. This is just a basic guideline. You can also see one other thing that I have included in every single type of research question, which is sort of grayed out at the top, which is meta-analysis and systematic reviews. Now, you don't want to include these in your systematic review as an outcome, but you want to look at the other meta-analyses and systematic reviews that have been done on your topic for numerous reasons. For example, if there is a systematic review on your topic, well, maybe you don't need to do another systematic review on that topic. But even, I mean, if a systematic review has been done on your topic, maybe it's a little old, it needs, a fresh update. Maybe you're taking a slightly different slant and there's newer drugs to evaluate nowadays. You'll still want to look at systematic reviews and meta-analysis on similar topics, because you'll want to look at the studies that they included. You might possibly not have found the ones that they included. You'll also want to address those in your article. So, for example, in the text of your systematic review that you publish, you'll want to say, while there have been many other systematic reviews on this topic, all of them are outdated and don't include this particular outcome that I'm interested in, and none of them are as good as mine, basically. So, even though you don't want to include meta-analysis and systematic reviews in your systematic review, it's a good idea to look at them. Same thing goes for letters, commentary about other studies and things like that. You might want to just take a brief look at them. Okay, question about how using PICO and the types of questions helps you create your list of inclusion-exclusion criteria. What we've just gone over is in this box on the left-hand side at the bottom. We went over the PICO and the determining types of studies and how that helps you define your inclusion-exclusion criteria. There's one more link right here. Let's see if I can get this open. This is from another entity, and it might help you or not. It's just got really, really basic inclusion-exclusion criteria. And some of the things might be good to think about. For example, first one listed, are you only interested in studies that were published in English? Or do you have the ability to translate studies that were published in other languages? This is always kind of a difficult situation, because if you only do English, you are excluding possibly really fantastic studies that were done in other countries and are very relevant. They just don't happen to be in the language that we speak. So that's a difficult decision to make. But you do the best that you can, and maybe on your team of authors, you have somebody who speaks a couple other languages. That would be helpful. There's some other things on here that you might want to think about. Once again, it separates out the criteria in the order of the types of questions. So prevention, treatment, intervention, same thing. In this particular guideline, diagnosis has some other things that you might want to think about for inclusion, exclusion. Really helpful guide. Lots of different things to think about. So inclusion, exclusion is going to be different for every single systematic review depending on the topic. At this point, you've got all of the articles that you have gathered. You have your inclusion-exclusion criteria, your list that helps you evaluate which of these studies you're going to include. Now, how do you actually do that? There's a lot of different ways. There's some software that I've listed here in the middle section. Rayon is wonderful. It's free software. There's a couple of other softwares that are highly recommended, like Covidence and Distiller, but they are not free. You might want to take a look at them, though, because sometimes they have one free trial that you can do. Be careful, though, because some of those only last a few months, and sometimes, it takes a little bit longer to actually finish your systematic review. So read the fine print if you're going to use a free trial version of a software. But we're going to look just at an Excel spreadsheet that does the same basic thing. It helps you decide which studies to use. It's really rustic, it's really basic, and it's a little bit hard to see. Let me bring it up so you see what I'm looking at. Okay, so here is just a basic Excel spreadsheet. If you don't want to use some other software or pay for it or take the time to learn how to use the software, you can use Excel. But if you have 1,000 citations, you can see quickly just from these two I have on the screen that you'll need glasses by the end of it if you don't already have them now. So we've just got 2 citations up here to look at. I've got the title in column A, the abstract in column B, and the keywords, which can be subject headings or just labels that the author put on there to help you figure out what the article is about. You can see here that in the red and green, I have the first round of voting where you're just looking at the title and abstract. And then we'll have the second round of voting when you're actually looking at the full text articles. So when you very first start out, just ignore everything on the right-hand side. We're just going to look at the titles and abstracts. 2 different people are going to have the same Excel spreadsheet, and they're just going to go through and look at the titles and abstracts and decide whether to include or exclude. Just put a little check mark in either column. So let's say, for example, these are about a type of colorectal surgery. Let's say we're looking for only RCTs and colorectal surgery in adults. Take a look at these and decide whether or not we want to include or exclude them. The second one is actually the very easiest. So just take a look at the second one listed here, and just by the title, tell me in the chat box whether or not you would include that if you were looking for RCTs and colorectal surgery in adults. Just type in yes or no in the chat box. Let me see what we get. You don't even have to look at all those keywords. You don't have to look at the abstract. Just the title will give you a hint as to whether or not you want to include this in your systematic review. Remember, we're looking for RCTs on colorectal surgery in adults. Let's see, in the chat box, I see a couple of people who have chimed in. Great. You could vote either yes or no on this one. Because we're only looking for RCTs, in the title of the article, it says it's a systematic review. So obviously, we're not going to want to include that in our systematic review. However, we might want to take a look at it, look at the full text, because it's a systematic review exactly on our topic. So they might have studies listed in it that we want to make sure that we also included in ours. So this might be one of those things where people differ in opinions as to whether or not you should go to get the full text and review it further. So not all of this is black and white and easy to decide as you would think. Let's take a look at the first one, that venous thromboembolism prophylaxis in colorectal surgery. This one's a little bit more difficult. What do you guys think? Should we include this or not if we're looking for RCTs on colorectal surgery? That is some tiny print. Okay, I've got some people chiming in. Several people have said no. Why is that? Why do you say no? Anybody got to give me one reason why you would not want to include this? Yeah, this one is a little bit difficult. This one is actually a review article. It's just a literature review. So I would vote no. But, you know, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what it is, what the methods is. Is it really a review article or not? So this one I'm unsure about. So I would vote to include it, because if there's anything that you're unsure about, you need to include it and look at the full text to decide, oh yeah, this is just a review article. We don't need it. This is not what we're looking for. That's the basic process for the first round of voting. After you've gone through all of the titles and abstracts and knocked out about 90% of them, you have to get the full text of the articles, and then you start the whole process all over again. So this time, you can use the same spreadsheet here. But we'll be looking not just at the titles and abstracts, we'll be looking at the actual full text. And this time, we have to list why we exclude any of the studies we exclude. So on this Excel spreadsheet, you can see up here that I have put exclude reason number 1, exclude reason number 2. But in real life, you would actually have changed those headings to be wrong age, wrong drug, wrong comparison, study not the long enough duration, about, anywhere from 5 to 10 main reasons why your study does not conform to what you're looking for. So we talk about inclusion, exclusion criteria, but really in real life, when we're going through the titles and abstracts, or we're going through the full text, we're just looking for one reason to exclude it. So if you think about it that way, it makes it easier. You don't have to list all the reasons why you should include it. You don't have to list all of the reasons why you should exclude it. Just one reason to exclude it, and it's out. Boom, you're done. That makes things go a little bit quicker if you think of it that way. And so that's a lot of information. Anybody have any questions about this? Kind of a tedious, detail-oriented process. Not the funnest part of the systematic review process, but it's where you'll actually finally get to the point where you get your studies and you can actually start working with them and seeing what the evidence shows you. So that's kind of exciting. It has at least a goal and an endpoint and gets you what you need to get to. There's some easier ways to do this whole process rather than reading these tiny little words on an Excel spreadsheet. Let me show you just real quick this free software called Rayon. Back at our lib guide here, we have Rayon at the top. It's one of the free ones. And I've got it already open here. So this is nice. I swear it looks overwhelming right now on the screen, but it really takes like 4 minutes to learn how to use this software. Very easy to use. You can share it with people. It'll automatically point out where you differ in opinions when you vote one way and your colleague votes another way. Oh dear, it says my session is expired. Hopefully it will let me see. Okay, so this is just a small little sample project that I have kept online just so I can show people how to use it. And now it's lost my place. Let's see. You can see here on the left that it tells you how many were voted on. So right now I've still got 57 that are undecided. After people start voting, this will change. The nice thing about this is that you can highlight words in either red for bad or green for good, and it kind of helps you to scan through much, much quicker. It's a lot easier to look at than that Excel spreadsheet. So you can see here, radical cystectomy was something that we were interested in. And as you scroll through, molecular, for some reason, was a word that we did not want. It indicated it was a type of study or topic that we were not interested in. So it's really easy to just, boom, you see that one word, you know you don't want to include it or you do want to include it. You vote right here. It keeps track of everything for you, and it compares it with your colleagues. When you get to the second round of voting, where you're actually looking at the full text, you can upload the full text right here. Really great software, really easy to use. I highly recommend it over that Excel spreadsheet that'll make you go crazy. That's Rayon. And right now it's the only free software that's available that does the voting inclusion exclusion criteria. So we have gone over the process of voting. We've gone over the inclusion exclusion criteria and how that will help you determine which studies to include or not. We've gone over some software that will help you do that voting inclusion exclusion. You've now gone from 1,000 studies to maybe 10 that you've decided you want to include in your systematic review. Fabulous. You need to document this whole process because you need to report it in your article. The kind of boring, tedious detail that you have to include in your article, but you definitely have to track those numbers of how many citations you started off with, how many you eliminated in the title and abstract voting, how many you included in the full text voting portion, all that kind of thing. So one of the ways that we are going to track that in our article is by this Prisma flow diagram on the right-hand side. It's kind of tiny to look at. I think I have it open in Word already. Let's see here. Yes. Okay, so this is a diagram that you will see in every systematic review of quality. It will either be in the text, sometimes it's in an appendix, but it's there. And basically, it just tracks those numbers of how many citations you started off with and how many you ended up with. Yeah, not the most exciting thing, but this top box is how many citations you found by searching Medline and Embase and all those databases. This other box is for some perhaps other articles that you found through other means, because you sometimes don't find everything in the databases. How many you had after you removed the duplicates. We have kind of glided over this step and sort of skipped it because it takes a long time to explain how to do that. And it's a very tedious, difficult process to do. So I've skipped that, I admit that, but if you get to that point, just come to me and I will help you do that. We do it in EndNote. There's different ways to do it. It's very, very detail-oriented work, but I can help you with that. So duplication, don't worry about that. Just come to me. When you get to the number of records that you'll be screening after you've removed all those duplicates, it doesn't make it clear the way the Prisma flowchart is set up, but this first box is how many you excluded in the title abstract screening, that first round of voting that you did. And then the second box is how many you excluded with reasons. Remember that second time when you're looking at the full text articles, you have to list why you excluded it. Wrong age range, wrong drug, wrong whatever. And it goes down further in the process, how many you include in your qualitative synthesis, which is basically the systematic review. If you go on to do a meta-analysis, then that number is for that bottom box. So this is the Prisma flow diagram. Basically for transparency, to show people that you did your systematic review well. You can tweak it and change it if you find you need to, if you want to get more in depth. A lot of people do, but this is the basic one. So you definitely want to keep this in mind as you're going through your citations. Make sure you keep track of those numbers so you can put it on this diagram. Let me show you what it looks like in an actual article. So, going back to the web, I have an example here of a systematic review. The Cochrane Systematic Review. These are always reviews of high quality. We've got the abstract. It even talks about the search methods and the selection criteria in the abstract, but that's very short information. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit to where to the actual full text article, down, somewhere down here. We do have somewhere. Here we go, methods. There's the part about the searching. Here we go, selection of studies, finally. And it tells you that there were 2 review authors who looked through all of the citations. They looked at the titles and abstracts independently. They tells you the way they dissolved their disagreements. And it's got the Prisma flow diagram right down here. So this is a nice small study. It only had about 500 citations. And they ended up with 4 studies in the systematic review, and they were able to use the data from those 4 systematic reviews in the meta-analysis as well. So it's a good idea to look at Cochrane systematic reviews to get an idea of the best way to report your findings, how they did the Prisma flow diagram, what they reported in the section on selecting studies. You don't have to invent everything from a blank page. You can just base it on other systematic reviews that have been done already. Back to our help guide. Do we have any questions at this point? That is the basic selection process in a nutshell. And those are the main things I wanted to show you. There's a lot more detail that goes into this, but that is a basic overview. At this point, we're pretty much done with the selection process. We've got, let's say, for example, we started off with 1,000 citations. We now have 10 articles that hopefully report 10 studies that have been done. Those two numbers can be a little bit different because sometimes you'll get two different articles that report about the same study. You need to watch out for that. There might even occasionally be one systematic review that reports about, there may be one trial that reports about different outcomes. So the number of articles and the number of studies don't always line up one-to-one. But you can just explain that in your review if you run into that situation. The next step in the process would be to actually extract the data and summarize it. We'll get into that in another class. But right now, this is it for selecting studies. So this is your opportunity. We're only at about 11:10. We've got about 20 minutes left or so. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll see if we can figure out the answer to it. So this is the end of the year. This is December. We haven't gone through the entire systematic review process. We've done about 5 classes so far, but we're still only at the point of selecting studies. So there will be more classes we'll be teaching starting January. And they will be announced on our library calendar. Here's the URL right now. We would love it if you would give us some input on the topics that you would like to learn more about systematic reviews or other types of literature reviews. And our survey is right here where you can suggest the topics that you're interested in. And Soraya, can you copy that and put that in the chat so they have the link for that?
Yes, it's now in the chat.
Great. We'd really appreciate it if you guys could take the time to just tell us what you think of this class and any other classes that you would like us to teach. If you have any questions in the meantime, there's 100 different ways that you can contact us. You've got my email address. You can book a consultation with me or any of the other librarians who specialize in searching and finding studies in databases. We'll spend 30 minutes, 60 minutes with you just going over your specific questions and needs. If you have more general kinds of questions, you can text the library or chat with us online or email us. So even though the library building is closed and we can't get to the print books, we are open just in an online format, and we are here to help you in any way we can. Most of our articles are going to be online anyway. A lot of our books are available online now. We've adapted pretty well to the online format. So you pretty much have access to almost everything you need. So that is it. Thank you for attending. I would love to talk to you about your systematic review projects, and have a great weekend and some good holidays. I hope you guys have time for some time off. And hopefully we'll see you in the next class. So thank you and goodbye.